My mama never feeds me no more. She used to do it, but now she's so focused on moving forward, she's just about forgotten anything else. The medicine to cure, she keeps saying. When we get to Dover Station, they'll have it. I hope so. That's where all the doctors is gone. I don't know anything about no medicine, but when the food ran out at the last town, we had to move. Mama seemed scared, and I ain't seen her like that since the day the world went out. A part of me was scared too, on account of Mama, but a bigger part just wanted a warm meal. A trifling comfort. It's just been so long. Mama, when are we gonna find food again? My voice sounded like a growl to me, my rumbling stomach playing tricks. Oh, Angel, I know. We're almost a ways to Dover now. They'll see you fixed up, you'll see. My mama loves me. Fat times or slim, she'd never let me starve. She even tried to feed us some when we left us down, but I reckon them old Value Mart cans had gone foul. I couldn't stomach it without feeling sick, but Mama ate some to stay strong for the both of us. I just wish we'd stop. Just for a while. Mama's got food, I know it. But she's keeping it to herself just in case she gets hurt, and I gotta go it alone. I love my mama. I hope she's right about Dover, doctors and all. If there's doctors and other folks about, there's food. We had to put the brakes on before a clearing come. Mama whispered, "Stay back, Angel. There's a man up there. We need to be quiet, as a church mouse, you hear?" Mama said all men wandering the road alone was dangerous. This one was no different. He came on all bluster and violence, pointing a Winchester rifle, like the kind Daddy had before the cities was damned and the graves was empty. "Move out of the way, or you both die," he hollered. His hand shook, more fear than hate. He had food. He was afraid we'd take it. I looked to Mama after the first shot went wide. The rifle clicked with the second. "Go on, baby," she said, taking the muzzle off my face. He did have food. I savored every bite, from scream to silence. Around 170 pounds, bones and all, but I only took a starving share. When I was good and fed, I told Mama thank you, that I loved her, that together, we'd never starve. But she just looked scared again, like she was listening to the wind, for the next monster to cross our path. "It's okay, Mama, now I can be strong for the both of us. And medicine or not, Dover Station will have food, you'll see." Brandon couldn't remember the last time he'd seen a dog, not since all this zombie stuff started, anyway. As far as he knew, the undead didn't eat animals. They were strict Pieplitarians, fresh, living humans only. But in all the chaos of the outbreak, most animals had made themselves scarce. Sure, there was still a squirrel or two running around the city, and plenty of birds. But it had been months since Brandon had seen a dog. This one had light gray fur with black speckles, the color of cookies and cream. 6 inches of frayed leash hung from its collar. "Hey there," he whispered, crouching and holding out his hand. "Who's a good boy?" The dog cocked its head. Brandon slipped off his rucksack, fishing out some jerky that he had scrounged from an abandoned gas station down the street. He tore off a piece and tossed it to the dog, who gave it a quick sniff and gobbled it down. "Who's a good boy?" The dog turned and trotted a few yards away, stopping to regard Brandon with ice blue eyes. "Hey, Where you going? He cooed, creeping slowly so as not to spook the animal. The dog scurried further up the sidewalk. It paused for a backwards glance before disappearing into an alley. Brandon followed. He'd never been much of an animal lover, but these last few months had been so lonely. It would be good to have a friend. At the far end of the alley, the dog sat, tail swishing on the pavement. Brandon approached slowly, tearing off another piece of jerky. He had gotten within 10 feet of the dog, whispering soothing words and assurances when it started barking. No, no, no. Don't do that, Brandon hissed, waving his hands. The undead couldn't see very well, their eyes gummed up with dirt, because they never blinked. They didn't breathe either, so no sense of smell, but they could hear just fine. They could hear your stomach growling with hunger from a block away. He knew that from personal experience. Brandon decided he didn't really need a friend after all. Turning to run, he found himself face to face with a zombie. She wrapped her rotting arms around him, sinking her dirty, broken teeth into his neck before he could react. Brandon broke free of her embrace, stumbling backward against the wall and clapping a hand to his wound. Blood squirted between his fingers and washed down the front of his shirt in waves. She had bitten through his carotid artery. The strength went out of the legs, and he slid to the ground. As she dropped down to bite into his calf, Brandon noticed the other end of the frayed leash still looped around her decaying wrist. The dog watched her with adoring eyes. Yes, you're a good boy, Brandon thought, just before the world went dark. Still loyal to your human, even though she wasn't really human anymore. It was just after midnight on a Wednesday night. I'd had a great shift at work, but I just wanted to get home. I was exhausted. I stepped out into the cold October night and began my walk home. I'd always hated walking at night, but I'd missed the last bus by a long shot. I crossed into the fields that stretched endlessly between me and home, and noted the thick fog that made the whole affair even more eerie. I shook off the feeling, safe in the knowledge that I would be home to my beautiful wife and sleeping children soon. After walking for a while, I saw a figure. Its dark silhouette inching, limping, floating through the mist. It was definitely human-shaped, but it did not move like a person. My mind searching itself for something anything like it. Zombie. I laughed at the idea. The figure seemed now to have disappeared into the mist. I was terrified. As I increased my speed, every zombie movie, game, television show I had ever seen flipped through my mind. I just wanted to get out of the thick darkness and to my home. I didn't see another soul for the rest of the journey. At last, I reached my front door. I breathed a sigh of relief. I couldn't believe how silly I had been. Strolling into the kitchen, I saw my wife. Her back was to me. I watched her for a moment. Something about the jerky movement of her head made my stomach drop. She turned around, and I knew I was not looking at my wife. There was now a zombie in my kitchen. My beautiful Bella dead and undead. It lunged toward me as I cowered. It opened its mouth, and a series of groans ensued. It was disgusting. The way it moved, the glassy look of the eyes. I felt sick knowing this was once my soulmate. It just kept coming toward me. I punched it, kicked it, screamed at it. It just kept coming. Then I realized why. It was trying to reach the children. I could not let it get upstairs. Rifling through the drawers of the kitchen, I found a large knife and a hammer. I grabbed Bella's hair as it reached the staircase. Pulling it backwards, I swung the hammer, landing a blow directly on its head. The creature squealed demonically. I kept swinging. It struggled against my grip as I did. The body I had loved so much, now being destroyed by me. Finally, I poised the knife high above my head, ready to plunge deep into my former beloved. For a brief second, I saw Bella, her beautiful eyes bright with tears. I heard her scream,
"Don't hurt the kids!"
as I drove the knife deep into her. Nice try, but a human would have bled after all that, I thought, as I looked around at the crimson walls and the scarlet floor. Something was very wrong. That much was obvious. I could hear sirens in the distance, and there was smoke filling the air. I had picked a hell of a week to go on vacation. There was some kind of outbreak or something, I don't know. I didn't care about the details. The first thing I had noticed when I woke up was the smell. I didn't think anything of it at first, but it got worse. By the afternoon, I was about to vomit. That's when I finally looked out the window. I cursed as I grabbed a jacket and threw it on and ran out the door. I don't know what was happening, but I saw fire on the skylines. Now that I was out of the apartment, I heard the screams. The apartment must have been soundproofed because they rang in my ears. Men, and the women and children too. Their screams were cacophony of terror in the halls. I ran down the halls as fast as I could. I waited for nothing. I stopped for nothing. I needed to get out of the city. It was a death trap in a bad situation. Everyone knows that. I ran out into the parking garage. I needed a car. I had taken a taxi from the airport. Thankfully, these were expensive apartments, and there was plenty of choices. But I hadn't hot-wired a car in years, and these were all newer models. I didn't have that kind of time. That's when I saw it. A black '67 Toyota Celica. A beast of a machine. But that isn't what grabbed my attention. It was idling. I approached it as cautiously as I could, while also moving quickly. I saw the silhouette of a man inside. There was definitely something wrong with him. But at this point, I had assumed that already. The world was in chaos after all, and he was just sitting there, in an idling vehicle. But I needed his car, and if he wouldn't cooperate, I would just take it. I got close to the door. I could see now that something was very wrong. His head was moving entirely too fast, almost like a seizure. I saw blood splashing against the window as his head moved violently at what should have been impossible speeds. I didn't care. I needed this car. Survival mode. I took in a deep breath and grabbed the door handle and pulled it open quickly. He lunged at me impossibly fast, but I expected that. I grabbed him by his hair and placed it where the door would shut. I slammed the door over and over as his inhuman growls grew weaker and weaker, as my arms started to give out and his head dissolved into a pulpy mass of flesh. I pulled the corpse out and tossed it to the side as I got in the driver's seat. I slammed my foot down against the clutch and threw the shifter into first. I was drifting out of Dodge.
All my life, I am perfect. Perfect grades. I get an I in every subject. Perfect looks. All the boys swoon and fall to my feet as I sashay past. Perfect attendance. Perfect CCA record. Perfect competition scores. I am the concertmaster in the school orchestra. I volunteer in the homeless shelter every day. I am the light of everyone's life, the apple of everyone's eye. So when I heard that the Lee family is moving into the house next to mine, and they have a daughter around my age, I'm ecstatic. I can't wait to meet my new neighbors and introduce their daughter to my large group of friends. I'm sure she will fit right in. Her name, as I found out, is Evelyn. She loves to draw, and indeed, I found her sketching furiously in her sketchbook, her brows furrowed in concentration. The next day, in school during lunch, Evelyn is still drawing, like it is more an obsession than a passion. Quite a crowd has formed over her, booing and haying over her creation. They part like the Red Sea when I approach, and I take a look in her sketchbook. It appears she likes drawing anime in particular. The characters seem to pop out of her sketchbook, flashing dazzling smiles like movie stars. Each detail is painstakingly drawn, right up to the sparkle and twinkle in their eyes and the spring in their footsteps. Her talent makes my heart drop. Smiling at her, I invite her to a sleepover tonight, just the two of us. To my surprise, Evelyn agrees instantly. Perhaps it is because it is only her first day of school, and she has not made any other friends yet. We spend the night mainly watching Evelyn's favorite anime. I do my best to make her feel comfortable, bringing her snacks, popcorn, whatever she wants. She also tries to teach me how to draw her favorite characters, but my drawings are a complete mess compared to hers. So I wait until she is sleeping, then I quietly rise, placing my hand over her head. Her aura throbs, pulses a brilliant cyan, glows in the darkness that falls in a light shower around us. I inhale in pleasure as knowledge comes rushing into my head. Images of anime characters and how to draw them flooding my mind. It's like I'm memorizing a detailed manual on how to draw, and I never felt more alive. The next day, Evelyn walks into class looking like a zombie, her shoulders slumped and her eyes as dull and gray, just as the other people surrounding her. She opens up her sketchbook and tries to draw out her feelings, but finds she can now only draw stick figures and lets out a guttural growl of frustration. Meanwhile, I submit my artwork at an online competition, and a prominent Japanese art director notices it right away. See, I told you, no one can beat me in anything. I am perfect.
The zombie apocalypse started less than a week ago, and our city has already been overrun. I have been hiding in my apartment with my wife and trying our best to survive against the undead. The power went out on the second day, and we have been forced to forage for food in the neighboring apartments. Yesterday morning, we were grabbing some food from another apartment when a pack of undead found us. We managed to fight them off, and we fled back to our home. My wife refused to talk to me all day and just curled up in bed. I decided to give her some space, as I know the last few days have been hard on her. She came to me this morning and lifted her sleeves to show me that she had been bitten. She begged me to kill her, as she didn't want to turn into one of those things. I pointed the gun at her head and told her I would always love her before pulling the trigger. I was lying on the floor cradling her body when the power suddenly came back on. I kissed my wife on the forehead before placing a blanket over her body. I switched on the television to see if there was any updates. I collapsed to the floor weeping as the news urged people to remain calm, as a cure had been found and they could bring everyone back. It's controversial, of course, more so than veal or foie gras. It'll never be kosher or halal. The vegans are right. These are sentient beings. We're eating animals. When you get a good cut of meat, prepared the right way, in my opinion, there's nothing more delicious. The taste really does depend on how fresh they are and what they've been eating. People are trying to figure out how to set up farms for this, but that's been difficult and controversial as well. For now, you'll need to hunt them on your own. They're not hard to find. A year ago, nobody had seen one. Now they're everywhere. You could always take one down with a bullet to the head, but the preferred way is to lure one into a purpose-built cage that locks them in. Then, get it restrained, and you'll need to inject about 200 milliliters of knockout juice with a submuscular needle. The syringe is comically huge. You can't get a blow dart with enough dose, but if scientists can figure out something you could shoot at a distance, that would be a game changer. Anyway, that takes one down right away, and it's dead for good. Have a freezer ready for most of the meat, but you'll want to enjoy one meal fresh. People have different favorites: the lean muscle of the leg, the richer marbling of the loin, or even the rich organs. My particular favorite recipe: saute some onions and garlic in butter, then sear the cube meat and serve over rice. I know it's ironic, and maybe there's a little bit of revenge satisfaction for everything that's been going on. But it's true, my favorite part of a zombie is the brains. So here we sit. The droning engine drowns out the noises, but I can feel your eyes on me, like dead mirrors. Every glazed reflection is a step closer to an inevitable end. The knife feels uneasy in my hand, like a rejected organ aching to escape, and I have to make every conscious effort to keep it steady. "You're not my first," I murmur, and that is the truth. She isn't my first, not by a long shot. I guess maybe the 10th, if you count that cashier, but that wasn't really intentional or anything. She was just there, you know, and I panicked. Panicked a screwdriver right into her eye. But you will be my last. The roads are clear, not a car in sight. When does that ever happen in this day and age? It's like some greater power, some unreachable intellect, decided to just go, frack it, let's give them this. Let's magic poof all the vehicles away. Let this drive be endless. Let it be perfect. Bittersweet and harrowing. A promise of finality and peace, waiting at the last drop of gas. She tries to break free of her restraints, but it's no use. I spent many hours making sure they'd hold. Duct tape, and ropes and chains, and whatever the frack I could find really. I have to see this through to the end. We have to see this through to the end. I love you, you know. I never wanted it to end this way. But in a way, I guess I always knew it would. I grip the knife tightly, knowing full well what I have to do to make it stop. To make it all go away. This thing inside me that grows like a tumor, spreading to every part of me like a putrid rot. Almost there now, I whisper. She doesn't answer. Why would she? How would she? I never cared much for rituals, but this one is different. It was hers. Her ritual, her ceremony. A special place where she felt safe and protected and alive, and I felt it only fitting to end it all here. We arrive at midnight. I pull her screaming out of the vehicle. The motor whirs steadily in the background as I ready the knife. Damn, I mutter. The gun, still in the car. Stupid. Should have just kept it on me. I turn to go back for it, but as I do, she somehow manages to scramble to her feet, and it only takes that. Only takes a moment of carelessness, and I feel her teeth digging into my leg. So here we sit. It won't be long now. I can feel the change coming. One steady heartbeat at the time. My wife screams and snarls and struggles. Her loose skin jaw opening and closing rhythmically. Her dead mirror eyes, so cold, so far away. I ready the knife. At least I can bring you some peace, my love. At least I can complete this ritual.
I had a husband once upon a time. I remember how tall he was, so tall he could smother my tiny frame in his physical affection. He used to smell like peppermint if I ever snuggled close enough to his chest. Most nights I'd wake up to find his body missing from bed, and I'd wrap myself in a gown and amble into the lounge, where I'd find him seated on the couch, fingers flying over his computer keyboard as he worked chronically. I'm doing this for you and Devin, for our future, he'd assure me with a glimmer in his eyes if I ever tried to beckon him back to bed. Devin was the name of our unborn child that he had already picked out, a son apparently. He was so good to me, yet here I am betraying him. I remind myself that all those memories with him are past tense. I don't have a husband anymore. This thing lumbering towards me across the hallway isn't him. So do it, I tell myself, but just as I'm about to, I hear his voice. Ma, he slurs incoherently, but is interrupted by violent coughs as he spits balls of blood and phlegm onto the carpeted floor. Me, ho, ni, he continues in a raspy voice. His syllables are dragged out, and he lacks enough teeth to pronounce the words intelligibly, but I hear him. I understand him, clear as day. For a moment, the wind is knocked out of me, and I stand there stunned, feebly grasping the gun in my hands. Thomas, I responded, testing him. Miha, Annie, he murmurs more audibly and confidently, and I'm sure of it. He's trying to say my name. Melanie. I falter, my trembling fingers brushing over the trigger. I hesitate for mere seconds, but it's enough. He closes the gap between us with surprising speed, and before I can do anything, hurls his heavy body into mine, slamming me to the ground. His half-eaten face is inches from mine, maggots squirming in his open wounds. He snarls, baring what's left of his teeth at me. A putrid stench drifts from the open cavern of his mouth as drool leaks onto my face, and I instinctually gag. Then his gnashing teeth come crashing down into my arm, sinking in. I don't resist. Instead, I succumb, listening to him rip, tear, and feed. The sound of his satisfied grunts fading as my vision turns to black from the blood loss. When I wake up, he's still waiting for me, his big eyes staring at me, an inkling of warmth still in them. They are the eyes of Thomas, my husband. We've lost so much, but even as we were stripped of our identity, memories, and humanity, we still remember and care for each other. Even as we lumber and shamble around this cruel, forsaken world, we do it together. Our love never died. It just remains undead.
I miss you, you know. I've been hiding at our home ever since you died. I lost my will to fight once you were gone. How did this happen? I'd been waiting for this to happen ever since I was a small nerd kid, watching movies, reading comics. I dreamed of being a badass. I wanted to be the leader of a group and get the hottest, toughest girl in it. Very well balanced. But now, since it happened, I've been just here. I haven't eaten in 3 days. I just don't want to. Thinking of your body rotting in the basement makes me sick. I can't even go out and give you a proper burial. Fracking crap. Why? Just why? I got my gun. I'll just end myself. But I'm scared. What if we don't see each other again in heaven? Or hell? I mean, as long as I'm with you, right? I don't mind the torture. Or whatever. Tell me something. Why did you have to be one of the first people that turned into flesh-eating monsters? We were alike. We could have survived this damn apocalypse together. In a way, you ruined my dream when I had to shoot you. Anyway, I'll just go downstairs and put this letter next to you. I'm sure you won't come back to life a second time, or is it a third? And read it, but I wanted to leave something behind, you know. A goodbye letter. Goodbye, sweetie. With love, Zach.
Holy shit!
What is it?
Seems like we got another idiot who thought these were real zombies. Most people are back to normal now.
Yeah, at least he hanged himself, or he would be facing a lot of shit like those other weirdos.
Fracking nerds!
Don't matter anymore. They're dead.
Okay then, next house people, move on.
Nobody realized what was happening outside of the concert hall for several minutes. The orchestra was interrupted to make the announcement about a civic emergency, but the announcement was interrupted by piercing screams coming from the foyer. From the balcony, one could see running figures leaping into the aisles in the orchestra. Concert goers began to scream and scatter. Almost immediately, the crowd was rushing to the stage. One of the cellists circled around the outside of the room. Awkwardly, perhaps reflexively, she clutched her cello and bow as she circled back to the stairwell leading to the balcony. The zombies poured into the orchestra floor. They were screaming missiles of rage that tackled people and tore at their throats. They grabbed people and pulled them over the seats, dragging every living human part they could reach towards their gnashing teeth. The cello player ran into the balcony. Some of the attendants that worked in the concert hall carried down equipment cots from the booth and threw them down the stairwell to make obstacles. They found tools and began prying up the seats and throwing them down the stairs. Soon, everybody in the orchestra floor was being devoured by crowds of zombies. The people on the balcony were screaming at each other, arguing, and crying. The zombies perceived those living in the balcony. They were milling around below, reaching upwards, climbing on each other. The cellist sat down in the middle of the balcony. She started playing the opening arpeggios of Bach's Prelude to Suite 1. The zombies had found the stairwell, and the attendants were throwing chairs down at them. The G note fell away in the shift. Many people in the balcony were trying to help tear up the seats. People were yelling at each other about taking to the roof. She played the diminished and minor chords. The zombies were pushing up the stairwell, even as everyone jammed more seats downwards. Some of the people were screaming and fighting about the best way to break the seats free from the floor quickly. Then everyone ran out of things to yell about at the same time. She reached the fermata, and the whole room was quiet. Then, they continued to pull up seats. The undead were pushing the mass of seats in the stairwell upwards, even as the people threw more down. Even while the people naturally fell into a bucket brigade. It became more and more apparent that the seats would not stop the writhing mass of zombies pushing them up. As she started playing the alternating staccatos, they were throwing the seats onto the swelling mound, cresting onto the balcony. While she played the rising chromatic scale, one of the zombies wriggled out from under the chair mound and pulled someone on the balcony to the floor. She played the finale, G arpeggios. The zombies began to pour onto the balcony. She began to cry as she played the closing chord. My father is a great problem solver. My father has always been the kind of man who somehow could get out of any situation unscathed. People generally warmed to him really quickly, and he would always use this to protect himself and his family. I remember once when I was 12, I accidentally knocked over a motorcycle outside of a shop, and the biker came out and started screaming at me. My father managed to calm the man down, and they ended up becoming friends. He was the one who realized there was something wrong with the news reports, as they kept being vague about what was going on. He started stockpiling food and supplies, just in case. He was right. His survival skills helped keep us alive when the troubles started, as he somehow had a knack for knowing when to hide and when to run. We have been holed up in a farmhouse for the last few days, with barely any food or water, and we are all really cranky. My father is constantly trying to keep my baby brother distracted by playing peekaboo. Suddenly, my mother came running into the house and told us to hide, as she had seen a horde of undead up the road. We all quickly grabbed what we could and ran down to the basement. We sat in silence, listening to the sound of the furniture upstairs being knocked about. We prayed that the horde would just move on. My brother began to cry, as he was both hungry and tired, and I could see the look of panic cross my father's face. I didn't have time to react, as I watched him grab my brother's body and snap his neck. The forage was successful, and the group returned with full bags, and only one dead member, at least at first. Then they discovered that Travis had a bite. The teeth marks jagged as a mountain line. It was on his shoulder. He had pulled up his collar because he was afraid, and he wasn't ready to die, and hoped a reckless hope that the infection would spare him. It didn't. When Travis turned, it happened suddenly. He only barely began to show signs, shaking, sweating, blinking rapidly, like a man seeing light for the first time. Kat was concerned and reached out. Travis' bite took the two smallest fingers from her hand. Her scream alerted the others. Tor and Grant were able to hold Travis down, while Laura drove a 16-inch rail spike through his left eye and into his brain. They took Kat's hand off at the wrist, using the wood axe outside the cabin. When the shaking began later that night, Kat didn't protest, or beg or run. Kat asked Hannah to be the one to do it. then rested her neck on the same stump. She'd lost her hand on hours before. The wood was still stained a thoughtful red. Hannah was efficient. There probably wasn't much pain. Later, they would bury Travis and Cat deep. It broke Tor. While he never cared much for Travis, Cat was like a little sister, a red ribbon pinned on the rotting corpse of the world. After they'd buried the pieces of her, Tor stood up and walked away into the forest. No one tried to stop him. Each of them made a choice, every moment, to either go forward or stop. The last they saw of him was his shadow at the tree line. Despite their best efforts, the cabin was found. It may have been the dim light of the camp lanterns bleating out, or the smell of cooking meat, or the muffled sounds of sobbing. Whatever the cause, the things came, waves and waves of them, crashing against the logs and boarded windows. Dozens fell, creating a stinking wall of dead flesh, 3 feet tall. Once it was over, the only two standing were Hannah and Grant. Max was cut outside in the first rush, while collecting wood. The things ripped him into small, soft pieces. Laura, Mel, Mandok, and Ren were all dragged outside during the siege. They each went out fighting, and Laura was dead before she was pulled through the window. Hannah was able to give her that mercy, at least. So only 2 left standing, but Grant was bleeding badly, covered in bites. He'd held the doorway, and nothing had gotten past him. His hands were shaking too badly to pull the trigger, so it fell to Hannah. Grant smiled and lied and told her it would be okay. After it was done, Hannah sat alone on the rough floorboards, surrounded by blood and supplies and dead friends. She made her choice. Hannah waited, dragging herself through the motions. What would life become as a zombie? Sweat dripped down my forehead. The pressure was getting to me. From the corner of the living room, I could hear the cries of my 2 children, Tom, 10, and Dayan, 9. They were hiding in the closet, just as I had told them to. Lying unconscious on the living room floor was my lovely wife Rebecca, dried blood matting her hair against her head. But I won't lose hope. I leaped up from my recliner and shuffled to squat near the window for the 3rd time in as many minutes and parted the curtains. The dead were out there, standing behind cars parked in front of my home.
Daddy, we're scared.
Tom whispered. I know. So am I, baby, but I won't let them get us. I promise. I picked up my shotgun that I had propped against the wall next to the window. I could start shooting in hopes of thinning the herd outside, but I knew the noise would only bring more of the ghouls to his home. I counted them again. 14, all circling my house. The masses were growing. So were the murmurs. It's not like that they show in the movies. These types could talk, as they seemed to make plans to hunt us down. The zombie's booming voice squealed that we are surrounded, sounding like God himself. But God wasn't in the business of killing and eating my family, as were the maggot sacks outside my once quiet home. Rebecca's eyes opened at once. She began to move.
Tom! Day!
She said in her new voice. I raised the shotgun and aimed at her head. I knew there was only one way out for me and my family.
No! Daddy, please!
Dea cried. I'm sorry, Pumpkin, but this is the only way. I will see you on the other side. Now close your eyes and hold your brother. Hold him tight. When you get to heaven, Mama, and I will be right behind you, baby. Go ahead now, close your eyes, and wipe away those tears. I shot my wife first, then both of my children. As I raised the shotgun to place it in my mouth, the living room window shattered in. The shots had excited the dead outside, and now they were flooding into his house in hopes of getting my family. But I knew I had cheated them out of that satisfaction. I pulled the trigger as they grabbed me and dragged me to the floor, but nothing happened. The gun had jammed. The zombies rolled me onto my stomach and placed cuffs on me.
We were too late, sir. They're dead. The wife and the kids. The psycho shot them. Oh my God, he shot them.
We decided to hide in an abandoned housing project, and we'd set up a small camp on one of the upper floors. Claire would go to the roof with a telescope she'd found in one of the apartments and return with reports of the front lines. The army had mounted a rescue offensive and were pushing into the city. How does it look? I asked. She shook her head.
Terrible. It's a slaughter. We're not going to make it.
Cabot sighed.
How bad?
We're just overwhelmed. There's hundreds of them, thousands, and worse. They really seem to enjoy killing. Some of them are covered in blood and gore, and I think they might actually be laughing.
What do we do? Stay here, or do we run?
Emma asked.
We can't run. We never make it. We're just not fast enough with Steve's hurt leg.
I felt embarrassed. It didn't hurt anymore, but he was right. I wasn't fast.
Let's go to the front lines. How about?
Tex suddenly added to the conversation.
Us? Help out!
Yeah, every little bit counts.
No, we stay.
I think we should go.
No, we will stay right here.
Cabot repeated.
Who elected you leader?
Cabot raised a pointed finger.
I've just about had it with you.
Get your finger out of my face.
Tex demanded, but Cabot ignored him and continued to point.
You want to go to the front lines? Fine, then go. Do what the heck you want, but we're staying here.
Get your finger out of my face.
Tex said again, but Cabot still pointed.
You think you're some kind of soldier, do you? Then go on already. We won't miss you.
I told you to get your finger out of my face.
He swatted at Cabot's hand. There was a sickening, crunchy tearing sound. Cabot's arm separated at the elbow and dropped to the floor. Cabot stood for a moment in shock, staring at the lost limb. All of us stared. An uncomfortable quiet ensued.
Hey,
Tex offered finally, quiet and apologetic.
I'm really sorry, dude.
Cabot bent down and picked the arm up by the wrist.
God damn it!
He hissed angrily. He examined the end for a moment, but knew there was no reattaching it.
I can't fracking believe this.
He threw the arm into a nearby trash bin.
Being a zombie really sucks.
He announced to no one in particular. A single green tear rolled down his rotting cheek. There was a tense, uncomfortable agreement. It did suck to be a zombie, and we were not only relatively new at it, we were simply not very good zombies. It wouldn't be long before my leg dropped off like Cabot's arm, and I'd only been dead a week. The gunshots seemed closer now. We knew we had no chance when the living finally came for us. Scott's back slammed against the wall of the dilapidated house. His eyes scanned the area frantically. How many had seen him enter? Would the barricades work? He checked the boarded-up windows. None let in any significant amount of light. The heavy furnitures piled in front of the doors, he hoped, would stop anyone from entering. Scott heard a scratching sound. They were coming through the walls. He picked up his baseball bat and machete, the last two weapons he possessed. They burst through the last bulwark. Zombies poured into the house. He could hear their incoherent babbling as they staggered toward him. "Join us," one gibbered. "You don't know what you're missing," another belched. "You'll be so much happier," gurgled yet another. Scott swung his weapons mercilessly, cutting down zombies only to be replaced by others. Suddenly, he felt a piercing pain in his shoulder. He collapsed to the ground, gazing upwards, to see a zombie had appeared from behind. "You're finally one of us," it blubbered, as the searing pain threatened to overtake his consciousness. He slowly realized that the room had become much brighter, the colors more vivid. He looked around to find himself surrounded by happy, contented people, beatific expressions on their faces. "He finally understands," one shouted. They began applauding him. He could feel their thoughts overwhelm him. They seemed so grand compared to his own. His face broke out in a wide grin as his will to resist faded. Their lockstep certainty filled him with an inner peace he had never known. He idly wondered how they could make good on their promises, or how they would deal with adversity. But even that thought boiled away as his heart filled with joy and a sense of belonging. Two of his new comrades helped him to his feet as he continued to stare in awe at his surroundings. The house was somehow in much better shape. He could barely remember its previous condition. He couldn't remember why he had fought them so hard. It seemed so much easier and more pleasant to give in, to believe what others did. It felt so natural. "Thanks, everyone," Scott cheered. "I didn't know what I was missing." Shouting erupted outside. "There's another one." Leaving through the portal that gave the kitchen a wide-open feeling, he followed the others to the street. Lashing out violently was a disgusting pig of a person, barely even human. Sweat oozed from thick folds of fat. His greasy skin burned with an unhealthy red. His heavy boots seemed like feral hooves, and his t-shirt was emblazoned with unpopular opinions. At first, Scott felt incensed by the thug's brutality, but his heart slowly filled with joy. He walked toward the flailing maniac, joining his comrades in voicing affirmations. "Join us. You don't know what you're missing. You'll be so much happier." With great gratitude, Scott realized that this holdout, this Porcini Truth Denia, was about to be shown a joy he never dared dream possible. There's no real reason to keep going. The sun goes up and the sun goes down. The days have no meaning as I have no meaning, but there's still that small piece of me that refuses to die. I don't sleep anymore, and the animal brain takes over everything. I'm a silent watcher behind the curtain, waiting in the wings, hoping for something, some kind of catalyst that magically rewires everything, and I could start to live again. That I might be able to regain some kind of control. I have no idea how long I'll live this way, and it terrifies me to think of it. I'm watching myself do things that I don't want to do, and I'm hurting people, but I can't stop it. It's a lot like I would think someone in a vegetative state would be behind their eyeballs, just watching everything and everyone. and not being able to do a damn thing to change it. But at least people in that state are stationary and harmless. I'm watching two people right now, a man and a little girl, who I assume is his daughter. I want to cry out to them for help, but even if I could scream, it would do nothing to help my cuz. It would help theirs, but it's not an option. The machine has taken over. I stopped being the driver long ago. I don't even remember the last time I slept. It feels like years. I shuffle silently past a store window, and the machine turns slightly, so that I get a good look at what I've become. I want it to end. This is not me. No one will ever truly see me in this life again. When will this life end? What I see is just a slow-moving, rotten husk that's driven by only one impulse: to feed. I want them to turn around and see me, but the machine is too quiet, and it's getting closer to them. I felt lost before everything happened, before I was bitten. I know now that I never truly lived. Maybe my punishment for a useless life is an eternity watching something else take it over. The little girl turns around just in time to watch me grab her father by the throat. I want her to run. Please God, just run. She does. I watch as I sink my teeth into his neck and force him to the ground. I can't taste it, I can't smell it, I can't feel it, and I can't stop it. The machine is feeding. I say a silent prayer while the body underneath the machine goes limp and stops fighting. Please God, wake me up. Give me some control. Let me stop this. And if that's not going to happen, let me die. The machine staggers to its feet and continues on taking me with it, trapped somewhere inside. And all I can do is watch what it does in silence. Since it started, in third world countries, nobody gave a shit until it was too late. Cymothoxie, the well-known tongue-eating louse, slips into a fish's gills, cuts their tongue off, and replaces it. There, it feeds off blood and mucus from the host until the host dies, where they detach. It started in a small, poor village where access to proper healthcare was only a pipe dream. Children would wake up crying that their mouths hurt, and within a few hours, they couldn't talk at all. The louse got bored with fish and moved on to much bigger prey. Within a few days, people were coughing up microscopic eggs, spreading the parasite across the continent at a rate faster than any pandemic. By now, you've seen how people react to a pandemic, especially one that they have trouble believing in. It only took about 2 years, but 75% of humanity no longer had a tongue. They had been replaced with a larger variation of the louse. Sign language became prominent, as verbal communication became impossible. Some people chose to stop eating. They would rather die of starvation than let a parasite control their tongue. So the louse adapted to that as well. They could control more than the muscle, apparently, connecting to the nervous system and forcing their prey to track down food. The humans that tried to avoid eating were forced to hunt and eat something with valuable nutrients the parasite needed: other humans. We joked that it was the zombie apocalypse, but it wasn't, not really. People weren't mindless drones, moved by instinct. They were conscious and aware of who they were biting into. Tears flooding down while they did it, but unable to stop themselves. Even if a host tried to take the easy way out, the parasite would catch on to the change in brain chemistry and alter the behavior, keeping the host alive. They won't even let us die. I can see in my wife's eyes that she's trying to tell me something important, but she can't pronounce the words. I wish I could ask her what she needs to say, but I can't talk either. I sign, "I love you," at her, and she smiles. For a moment, everything is okay. We only have little moments now. Zombies are not scary, right? Once you've killed millions of the undead in video games, or seen the never-ending hordes taken out in comedy horror movies, it just all kind of loses its magic. It has gotten to the point where even the idea of discussing a zombie survival plan receives an eye roll. Especially since the proper plan is actually quite simple, right? Don't get bitten. Keep your distance. Create difficult to traverse terrain, since they are too dumb to navigate it. Build a wall. Rebuild society. Zombies. More like Barizis. That's why I wasn't so worried when the news started talking about dead bodies rising all over the world. I figured I could handle this. Just break the heads like a melon and destroy the brains. Should make for a fun few weeks. I even hope someone like my boss would get infected. Okay, so I was a little spooked when my neighbor's dead cat came back to life and waited outside her home for her owner to come out. Muffin clawed the skin from her right arm off. Gross. Fairly original twist to the formula, but not unheard of. Turns out the rule now is that everything that dies becomes a zombie and tries to attack the living. Oh, and also it can infect the living and cross species like some shitty form of rabies. I got turned fairly early on, at least a month or so in. Mosquito bite got me. It sucked. I was so itchy, and then dead. Barely even get to use my two-handed anime sword. I also shambled around an abandoned mineshaft for near enough a decade trying to find some tasty living flesh to consume. Oh, and I was conscious all the while. I couldn't control my body, but my brain was active. The population of the living dwindled in the following 10 years. Billions to millions, to thousands, to the final stronghold of humanity, which of course fell as well. Turns out, when everything that dies becomes one with the Z-Force, you sort of have unlimited sleeper agents. So, now here we are. A dead planet with nothing living. I've always wondered what would happen if all the living was gone during a zombie apocalypse. Would they evolve? Would they rot? Go vegan? Nope. It turns out we just wait. We legitimately stand still in an unending, never-resting, eternally conscious wait for more living flesh. For life to evolve once more after billions of years, only to be snuffed out before it can start. And then we wait some more. And some more. And more. Forever. So if I can recap this whole thing. To the living, zombies are not scary. But when you are turned, and your purpose to feed is done, and you can only wait for reality to end, so you can be free. That is truly terrifying. We're all afraid of zombies. The apocalypse, we call it. And of the world as we know it. Thousands of stories written, movies made about zombies. Some of us even prepare for what we think is inevitable. One idea that stuck with me the most is, what if zombies could understand and interact like normal humans? What if they were sentient and evolving? What if the undead were cunning enough to live among us without revealing their identity? Hunting their prey without anyone else noticing? What if it had already happened centuries ago? What if zombies lived among us once and now control us? What if only a few people noticed them and tried to kill them for good? Tried to stop them from returning? What if the rest of the population at that era weren't afraid of the zombies? What if the first ever book written about zombies doesn't tell us a tale of horror, but of worship? What if the one man who rose up from his tomb and walked the earth with 2 holes in his hands 3 days after he was buried wasn't so frightening? What if instead of being afraid of them, they were considered Messiah?
Please subscribe, or the toxic skull will come for you.